This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 121.
I honestly think active learning is the magic sauce. It's not flipped learning. But flipped learning is the easy button to get you to active learning. It's what makes it easy, because what it does is it gets the teacher away from the front of the room. And once you're away from the front of the room, most teachers, professors, whatever, they start asking the question, what am I going to now do with this extra time?
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Kennerman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here for the first time in a long time without my co-host, Mr. Matt Rogers. And so tonight I had an absolutely unbelievable conversation with Jon Bergman. And honestly, this is kind of a dream come true for me because he is an educator. He is an author. He is a speaker that I have followed for a long, long time and had a direct impact on the way I taught and the way learning was facilitated in my classroom all the way back to 2015. So Jon Bergman is most known for his work with Aaron Sands in writing the book on flipping your classroom. And he has done a lot since then. We talk a lot about flipping your classroom, how to create flipped lessons, screencast, mastery learning. We talk a lot of different concepts tonight, and we go knee deep in instruction. We go knee deep in why this is so beneficial for students, how teachers can get started, and how this can truly transform the way learning is facilitated in your classroom. So although I miss Matt, and although I love having him here with me, as I share a little bit into the show, I'm selfishly a little happy he wasn't here, only because I was so excited for this conversation. I got to hog the mic and really have that one-on-one time with Jon. But he just gives such great ideas, such great insight. And what I can promise you is at times it may seem overwhelming. At times it may seem like this is too much or this is a lot, but I promise you it's not. And I promise you, as we go through the conversation, we break it down and we simplify. And we also point out the fact that in 2018, when I was using this, when he was writing on this and speaking around the world, and I was doing a little bit of presenting on this at local conferences, there was a huge barrier in just getting teachers comfortable with the fact of making a screencast, making a video, how to use the technology. The pandemic has shifted that understanding where we all kind of get that now. We all have tools in our pocket. We all have screencast tools. Some of us use Edpuzzle and other things to track students and embed questions into it. So that piece is out of the way. And now we can truly focus on how to leverage this instructional strategy to have an impact on the learning that takes place in the classroom. So I think you will love this conversation. So stay tuned throughout, because we go through highs and lows. We go through things that make it seem incredibly far-fetched, as well as super simplified in something that you can truly implement in the next couple of days in your classroom. So let's check in with our Teach Better affiliate and jump right into our conversation with Jon Bergman.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcast. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Jon. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. I am very, very excited to have you on this conversation and this podcast. Like I shared with you, I've been following you for a long time now. And I always love having my co-host Matt here, but I'm a little selfishly happy that he's not here, so I get to hog the conversation as we learn from you tonight. So please kick things off for us, real simple. Just officially introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from and give us your snapshot and your backstory in how you're involved and a part of education.
Yeah, I'm Jon Bergman. I started teaching in 1986. in inner city Denver, Colorado. I've been in a number of schools. I taught in an urban school. I've taught in a blue collar school. I taught in kind of a suburban school, a rural school, a very wealthy suburb school, and now even a private school. But I guess what I mostly taught high school science, chemistry and physics, and earth science and different subjects in science. And what I'm most known for is Aaron Sams and I in 2007 began the development of the flipped classroom model in our rural school, Woodland Park, Colorado, Woodland Park High School. And Aaron and I wrote a book called Flip Your Classroom, which led to 12 or 13 books. I'd have to sit and count them, which led me to travel the world, to go see everything you can imagine in the world, to work with schools all over the world. I've been everywhere you can think of, from New Zealand and Australia and South America and China and Europe and Turkey and the Middle East and everywhere. But then in 2019, I really felt the call to go back to the classroom. So I'm now back teaching full-time high school science. I had kids this morning. That's my story.
That's amazing. And I'm really looking forward to going through all facets of that. What I would love to know is, when you were transitioning through those different demographic of schools and school districts and cultures and communities, what did you notice what were big changes that you had to adapt to as you worked with schools that were in very different communities? And then what also held true? What was a standard of your classroom, or a standard of the way you interacted with students and parents, regardless of the type of community you were teaching?
I guess, Ken, I'd start with the similarities. Kids are kids are kids. And I started in '86 at an inner city school. There were a lot of, insecure, adolescent kids who were just growing up. And in many ways, a kid still is the same. It's just they're going through those lots of changes in their life at that stage of life. And I think there's a lot of similarities. Now, clearly, our society has changed a lot since 1986. When I first started teaching, I kept track of my grades on a piece of paper, like a little grid thing that I was handed out, this little thing. I had to add the things up by myself. There's no copy machines. I mean, people have no idea what we had to go through for teaching way back in that day. The world has gone through a huge technological change. The computing age came of age during my career in education. And I think that has fundamentally changed. I guess now what I'm seeing as I look at my students, I'm increasingly concerned just about how technology is negatively influencing students' brains in ways that I'm a little bit worried about, with sort of technology addictions, especially brought on by the COVID pandemic. So I think there's some things that are, I believe we're now in the most distracted generation, maybe I would say, in the history of the world. And I see that in my students, and I think that's not helping them. Here the guy who helped start Flip Learning is saying that we need to be careful about technology. I know that's kind of weird, but I do believe that we need to think what that looks like and how to use it well, and to help our students to not misuse it in ways that are actually harming them.
Absolutely. So I'm very aligned with some of your thoughts there, and I kind of feel like we're getting towards a conversation that I would really love to have. So can you please define what you would define a flipped classroom as? Please speak to the story of kind of how it developed and how it may be transformed from year to year. I might jump in a little bit and share my own story with utilizing it as well.
Yeah. So in 2007, Aaron and I were teaching at this rural school in Colorado, and we had a lot of kids who were missing class because when you're a rural school, if a kid's on the baseball team, the debate team, you're on a bus at noon on the way to the closest high school, which was 45 minutes, but some schools were 3-hour drives. And so our kids in the afternoon were gone. And so we discovered software, some screencasting software that doesn't exist anymore. And we started recording our lessons in the morning so they'd have something to watch. And then our director of curriculum, she came down one day and she was having a chat. She says, Aaron and John, I love what you guys are doing with this recording. My daughter's attending a local university, and one of her professors is recording his lectures, and my daughter loves it. And then she said this is the kind of weird thing that made us start everything. She said, because my daughter doesn't have to go to class anymore. And so that afternoon, we said, that was a weird conversation. And that's when we said, well, wait a second. What's the value of class time if you don't have to go to class? And so we said, well, what if we like pre-recorded our lessons? And we don't even know who actually said that, but we looked at each other and said, well, we should do that. And that's how the whole thing started in 2007. And we said, let's do it. And then we saw crazy good results. We saw test scores go up 1 standard deviation. We saw an amazing transformation in our classrooms. Little did we know that this would become a movement that would help teachers all around the world, that it would help teachers with COVID. I mean, since that time, we eventually wrote a book, and that book was translated in, I want to say, 13 languages, which then led to many other books, which then led to kind of a body of knowledge about what are best practices in flipped learning. And we didn't know if there was best practices. We were just playing around with this stuff. But now we really know. I mean, the research, there was no research. Now there is thousands and thousands and thousands of studies talking about the efficacy of flipped learning, and not just the efficacy, but also how it works well. You know, what are good strategies of flipped learning? What are poor strategies? So, and also, I mean, I'm actually not flipping my class anymore. Sort of I am. I'm doing mastery learning. I've just written a book. My newest book here is the Mastery Learning Handbook. And my students go through a mastery, I call it like mastery, empowered by flipped. So my students work at a flexible pace as they walk through content. And now it doesn't work unless I've got the flipped content. So that's an important piece of the puzzle. But there's now a huge movement across the world moving to a mastery competency-based learning. And flipped is really the magic sauce to make it work. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that have happened. I don't know. We can go a lot of directions here in our conversation.
I totally agree with all that. And what the magic is not the recording. It's what happens in the classroom. So can you speak to that? How, because I've taught teachers, I've encouraged teachers to use this strategy. I've used it myself, and it's not about the video or the lesson being recorded. That's the setup to the magic. So how does it transform the way a class operates? Because teachers, if you are pre-recording lessons for students and then they're walking in the next day and you're just teaching the same thing you've always taught, they're going to stop watching your lessons because there was no value to the lesson that they watched, because now they're just hearing it again. So how does it change the way your classroom
Well,
works?
first of all, never do that. I mean, if you expect them to watch it, then don't re-lecture, or you'll just ruin the whole system. But the best way to understand flipped learning, I believe, is to think of 3 pictures of Bloom's taxonomy. So, you think of Bloom's taxonomy as typically presented as a diamond, right? At the bottom is knowledge, understanding, application, analysis, evaluation, creation. And it's a triangle. And if you think of a traditional classroom, my traditional classroom, when I was a teacher for 19 years, honestly, before the flip thing started, and I would stand up and I'd do my chalk talk every day, or not every day, but many days. And then the students would do I call this the easy stuff. I would do knowledge transfer, knowledge and understanding in class, and then I would send them home to apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. Of course, in a flipped classroom, if you think of Bloom's taxonomy, put it upside down, and if time is the area of the inverted pyramid, if you will, you'll spend less time in knowledge and understanding and more time on applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. And then as I've thought more, and in another book I wrote, I introduced this idea of flipped as a diamond. And if you think of it more as a diamond, I think you should spend the bulk of your class time. Again, time is the area of is the width, yeah. And so we spend the bulk of your time in the middle of Bloom taxonomy in the application and the analysis section. You still need information transfer. So I'm not anti-lecture, by the way. That sounds weird. Even though I haven't lectured since 2007 to my class, I haven't. I have lectured, but it's through these cheesy videos and these readings that my students do. So that sets them up, as you talked about earlier, that sets them up so that we can do interesting, engaging things in class. And there's so many different activities that you can do in class. And it depends on the lesson. It depends on the content of your class. I mean, if you're a history teacher, you probably want to have discussions and debates. This is what you do in class after the video or the reading is set up. If you're an English teacher, maybe you want them to write essays without ChatGPT. You want them to analyze literature. If you're a world language teacher, you want to practice speaking the target language or writing in the target language. If you're a physical education teacher, you want them not to learn how to play the game, you want them to play the game. If you're a coach, a lot of sports teams have flipped their practices, and some with literally won state and national championships. They have flipped their practices. So the student has a short video they watched about the plays. I'm thinking of a football team, a U.S. football team, Gridiron. And they flipped that, and then they have more time to practice. And the more time to practice, of course, the better they perfect their skills, the better they do on the field. I'm a science teacher, and as a science teacher, we do more experiments, more problem solving. I mean, there's so many different activities you can do, and it depends really on your content, right? Things that we've always known are good for kids, and what Flip does is it gives you more time, right? I've always, before I flipped, I did experiments. After I flipped, I did more hands-on. It's a win.
It really is. And homework is, I go back and forth on homework in so many ways. And I did in the classroom as well, but you're controlling the homework. You're eliminating the potential for frustration because they don't have to apply. They don't have to work at higher level thinking skills when they're at home without the quote unquote expert, their teacher, and, possibly need the support of their parents. It's a controlled environment. It's a controlled length of video. It's a controlled, maybe they have notes to take with it, or maybe there's a small worksheet applied to it, or maybe they literally just have to watch it or prep a lab sheet or different things, but it's a controlled amount of time. Students can watch it I've had many students tell me they watch all of my videos at 1.5 or 2 times speed. And you know what? I would never know because they always came in showing that they watched it or they listened to it and they understood it. So if you want to watch it at 2 times speed and you can still get it, great. It gives them the opportunity to pause. It gives so many positive aspects. And so you're right. It was, you said earlier about preparing teachers for the pandemic. Creating screencasts was not new to me when the pandemic started, but it was for many teachers. And as we transitioned back into schools, depending on where you were out longer. My district, we were half and half for a while. And so teachers were using some of their own videos. They were using resources like Edpuzzle to deliver content to students because learning was asynchronous half of the time. And now as we transition back into very normal environments, there's this push of like, keep using that stuff. And I see teachers just having kids watch videos in class or, just watch the video. And then there's the push the other way of, I need to get kids off of screens. They were on screens too much. And I believe there's a clear, fair balance between that. And so you've spoken to it a little bit with what you're saying in your work now back in the classroom, but how has your skill set of developing videos and developing screencasts transformed into this mastery learning where you kind of alluded to not really doing it as a flipped model anymore?
Well, and I really call it a mastery learning model, and then that's what it is. So the students, the big idea of mastery, we've all had to master driving before we got our driving past the driving test, right? So you skip, hopefully, some people aren't very good drivers even after they get a driving license. But the idea is that mastery's been around forever. If you're a doctor, you have to pass your boards, and then you've got to go through a residency. There's things you have to do before you get your license to say you can practice medicine or law doc degrees. That's really the same idea. So my students will work through a given body of content. So we'll have a unit, I call it levels because I've slightly gamified the class. So they work through a level at a slightly different pace. So right now my students are, it's the end of April. We're about to finish, May's coming. And so in my chemistry class, for example, we are in the last unit, and the last unit is level 9. And I've got some students today who were finishing up 9.4, and I've got some students who are at 9.7. 9.7 is the last lesson of the year. And so they're all at a slightly different place. When they finish level 9, they will have a summative test, and they have to demonstrate formatively mastery as they move through this. They have to demonstrate mastery on 9.1, 2, 3, etc. And then they will take a summative exam, which they then have to demonstrate mastery to get, on that. If they fail, they do not demonstrate mastery, then they will take it over until they pass it. And then, as a note, at the end of the year, what they're going to do is we have a big end of year project. So I moved to a project based learning, and it ties the concepts that they've been learning throughout the year all together. So they're going to use elements of level 1 through level 9, if you will, to solve a chemistry problem with 3 different methods and evaluate the quality of each method. Very high kind of Bloom's taxonomically. These are, evaluation type skills, analysis, etc. So that's kind of, you get the idea. And throughout the whole year, we've been doing this, and the mastery thing, it just works. It's the magic thing, really.
It's something I really wanted to get to when I was teaching 5th grade. I was close. I did I don't know what kind of version you want to call it, but students were working at their own pace in my classroom, but I collected everybody at the end of the unit. So everybody, due to one, just I needed more time to really bring the whole thing together, plus the little bit of the pressure of pacing with my district, with when units had to be completed and kind of keeping everybody relatively on the same timeline. I think if I was there a couple more years, I would have found a way out of that. But I kind of allowed them to navigate through a unit at their own pace with scaffolds, like you said, the formative checks, pulling small groups. And then they all were funneled and collected, and they took a summative assessment on the same day.
My kids still take a summative. They will all take their first attempt on the same day because their first attempt. And then, 60% or so will pass it on the first attempt. And then I've got to work with the 40% who are still needing extra support and whatever. And there's exceptions, some kid who's been out sick or those kinds of things happen. But generally speaking, I used to kind of let them pick. But, if some kids aren't given a pace, they won't have a pace at all.
Right,
kids
right.
Like,
what other strategies do you have to motivate those that, like you said, won't keep a pace, and also to kind of keep everybody relatively moving in the same direction with that little bit of flexibility?
I have found, and this, as I was writing my new book, I was on kind of a quest. I talked to a lot of people who are doing mastery learning. So, Aaron and I talked about mastery learning in our first book, Flip Your Classroom, and we started dabbling with it. We wrote about that. But then, I did the sort of, left the school system to do the world tour and tell people stuff. And then I came back, but a lot of people continued to use the mastery model. And it wasn't just from our work, but others' works as well. So I interviewed 30, 35 people, I don't want to say, as I was doing the book. And one of my big quests was to solve some of the problems with mastery learning that I saw. And actually the research says that mastery learning works best with students who struggle, not with your advanced students particularly. That's been the rub on it. And I said, I got to solve that problem. And it was kind of a conversation. It was 2 conversations, one with a middle school English teacher on the East Coast, somewhere, I want to say New Jersey, Adam Swan, and then a Finnish researcher, where the trick is I don't expect every kid to master the same level of content. So though this unit that I was just talking about, the level 9, I want them to master everything. In most of my units, so the previous unit, level 8, the most important content was that they master lesson 1, 2, and 3. Everybody had to do that. That is the most important topics. That's the critical essential objectives. Objective 5 and 6, or 4 and 5. 4 and 5 were nice to knows. So they literally, when they get to the end of a unit, some students have chosen, it's like choose your own adventure. Some students will have mastered 5 topics. Some students have mastered 3 essential subjects. And so there literally are 2 different summative exams, or 2 different types of summative exams. And then I assign different points. My students still love points. I have a A, B, C, D, F school. I still believe more in a competency-based grading system, but I don't get to use one. I have one, but it's sort of hacked with numbers because they have to get a percentage. But anyways, that's a whole other story. But so they have different levels of tests, and they get to choose their own adventure. You're going to go for basically the full-on harder test, or you're going to go for the easier test. You choose, pick. And that keeps my kids ish together. That's been that's the game changer for me, is that I can vary what the expectations are, still making sure that they master the most important things, my students who lag behind.
Well, I love the point you're making, because even if you're a teacher not doing anything close to mastery, not using any style of screencasts or videos or flipping. I think what you just pointed out is really important for teachers to hear, and it's identifying skills and content in a unit as must know, critical, and nice to know. And I work a lot with teachers, especially now as an instructional coach, and even when I consult with other districts, is identifying that. And this, I always hear, I have to keep pace. I have to get through this lesson. I have to get to the next unit. And that pressure comes from many different directions. And I think it also is pressure teachers put on themselves. And I think part of it is a lack of time to understand the state standards. And in Pennsylvania, it's called eligible content in the state standards, to know exactly what students are going to be assessed on and exactly what students need to know. And when you actually look at that, it's really it's so much shorter, and it identifies exactly what you just said: the absolute critical to know content and the nice to know. And the how, like in math, I have this conversation constantly. How much time are you spending on trying to get students to prove that they can do all of these different algorithms by hand, instead of just putting a calculator in their hand and allowing them to apply the learning with much higher level types of questions and higher level thinking and reach that eligible content standard? And so I think it's really important for teachers to understand that from a content perspective, to know where you can cut corners or where you can enrich, because enriching sometimes is the hardest style of differentiation. What's the next thing I can always get these kids to do other than another worksheet? Well, maybe it's exploring these nice to know concepts while you reinforce the must know concepts with the students that are not ready for that. Do you have any other ideas or strategies for how you identify that, other than just your experience and your deep understanding of the content you're teaching?
That's been my go-to. I mean, the good news is before I flipped my class, I taught chemistry for 24 years. And but you know, when I came to this new school, they asked me to teach physics, and I taught physics for my first in my third and fourth year of teaching, which is in the dark ages. So that was all kind of refresh content. And I've gotten way better at identifying. Frankly, that first year I taught way too many things, and I've cut a lot of things out as I've become more of an expert in that field. But the reality is there's someone at your school who knows this. I still do consulting, even though I'm teaching full time. I have 3 schools that I'm mentoring right now. And as I work with individual teachers or departments, depending on the school system, that's a huge, what's essential. I want you to look at this unit. Okay, let's look at a unit on adding, fourth grade, adding fractions with unlike denominators, or that whole for adding fractions. What's essential and what's not. And honestly, I have found the teacher said, yeah, here's the 3 things that aren't essential. And so it's not that hard. If you know your content reasonably well, you know what's important and what's not. And if you're a young teacher and maybe you don't know, there's an older teacher at your school who knows, or dadgum, use Twitter. Somebody out there has taught 4th grade forever, and she knows what is essential and what's not essential in this very specific unit. And obviously use your state standards, whatever standards you're in. I know other countries have whatever your standard systems are. Those are the kinds of things you want to look at. You know or if you don't know, it's easy to figure it out.
Right. And like you said, lean on the teachers that have been teaching that content for a while, because the longer you're in that grade level as an elementary teacher, or the longer you're in that specific area of content is where you'll really start to identify those. So lean on those veteran teachers. So the pandemic caused teachers to use screencasts a lot and videos a lot. And so 5 years ago, I think there were a lot of teachers that didn't even know they could make screencasts, didn't really know what screencasts were. And now they all know what it is. Everybody knows the what, everybody knows the how, but I don't think many people know the why. So can you speak to why screencasts, video lectures, anything that those pre-recorded things that you're using in your classroom, what are the true essential elements to make it a rich learning experience for students, whether it's the amount of time, the style of instruction, key components that you put in there? And then I want to kind of dig more into the why we use it in classrooms.
So, I mean, something interesting is before, when I would do a lot of the training, I spent a lot of time teaching teachers how to use and make screencasts. And post-pandemic, since I've been working with schools afterwards, I haven't spent a moment teaching them how to make a screencast. They all know. The question, though, that I have found is teachers still don't know how to make a quality screencast. What are the elements that go into making quality screencasts? And as I have, dug much deeper as a writer now, I have read research. I mean, one of the things you do when you write a book is you do a lot of research, and discovered, for example, there's this professor. I forget where he's from. It doesn't matter. But his name is Richard Mayer, Mayer, and he's got these principles of effective digital design, which at first he did this many, many years ago on how to make an effective PowerPoint for education. But now he's, of course, moved into the issue of he's still around and he's continuing his research on rich multimedia experiences, which of course now includes video. And he's got these principles, and I'm not sure I can rattle them off the top of my head, but the principle of he's got names, but I'll summarize a few of them. Number one, you said it, keep them short. So one thing is you want to have one topic. If it's a video, let's just talk about video. I still flip with text too, by the way. But if it's a video, is you want to keep it short. One thing I promise your listeners that if you have a 30-minute lecture that you deliver every year on a topic, whatever, I promise you, after getting decent at making a video, it'll be a 10-minute video. I actually call it the rule of 3. It'll cut the time by a third. Now, if you can teach the same thing that you normally teach in 30 minutes, in 10 minutes, that's a win on time for your kids. The other benefit of that,
I'll add a promise to that because it's 100% true.
That has been, I think that's my rule. It's about a third. So the 30 becomes a 10. Okay, so I promise you it will. The second thing that does is, of course, then is a pausing and rewindable device. We've all been in that lesson where the teacher was doing something and you were frantically taking notes, and then he was on to the next subject, and you're lost. Well, the beauty of a video is there's a pause and a rewind button. So students can pause and rewind, and they can consume it at their pace. So that's huge. That's such a huge thing for them. Now, it's important, again, I'm just rattling off other important things, I'm not talking about the quality of video now, I'm switching topics, but it's super important that you take time to teach your students how to watch an instructional video. And so I will spend, as a high school, I teach high school sophomores, juniors, and seniors. I will spend a week having them watch videos in my class. I will not assign videos at home because I want to watch them watch videos of me, which is weird. But I want to see how well they're taking notes and how well they're interacting with it, etc. So there are some things. I mean, you mentioned Edpuzzle, so I've used different tools. I've used Edpuzzle, I've used Actively Learn, I've used Perusall, and I keep switching which ones I like. I don't think it matters which one, just pick one. These are tools that I call video interaction tools, where in the middle of the video, you can have it stop. And then when there is a question embedded in the video, then there is, it pauses their brain and forces them to do stuff. There was a study released yesterday or this week, anyways, very recently, that's compared students who watched videos like with an Edpuzzle where there were questions interspersed versus ones who just watched the video straight up. And the study said that actually the student achievement was equivalent whether they had the questions in the middle or not. But those who had the questions in the middle spent less time. So they had less time because what the researchers postulated, I'm going to maybe butcher this a little bit, but I just read it just a couple days ago, is they had said something like that paused their brains and they were able to digest it faster. That sounds weird because the students who watched it through would have to watch it through again, but the students who had that pause and then they took more notes, they were more efficient with time by watching the videos. And it was a study of, it wasn't a whole large group. It was like 70 students. So it wasn't like 7,000. Right. So
it's probably kind of like the thing where you're reading and then you realize at the end of the page you zoned out and you have to read the page again.
And there's that.
And then you zone out and you read the page again. And
exactly. I think that's exactly what's going on. So, I mean, that's a best practice. Other things, let's go back to it while you're making the video. Other things that are known, I forget again what this principle is in Mayer's world, but students learn better from somebody who is talking in a conversational tone versus a more formal tone. Another principle that he'll talk about is you need to have a lot less words, text, and a lot more pictures and illustrations. If it's something like sort of mathy or procedurally, then they need to watch you do it, et cetera. And he's got a list of, I want to say 10 different principles. I could pull up a screen and chunk them off right now. I just don't have them off top of brain right now.
Yeah, I'll link to them in the show notes.
Find Richard Mayer's
those
principles,
exact
Mayer.
Yep.
It's very easy to find on the internet. His stuff. He's got some great stuff. So,
yeah, the two that stick out to me are the time for sure. I've heard things like the time should match the grade level, and I think there's some truth to that. Obviously, it's not a set in stone rule, but the younger the learners are, the less time they're going to be able to interact and focus with
and
it.
Never make it over 15 minutes, even if you teach 18-year-olds. Right. So I sometimes use as the age of your student is your maximum number of minutes. So if you've got a 10-year-old, the best you can do is a 10-minute video. But that's your max. It's your total upper limit. So
right. Absolutely. And the matching of the screen, I think, is so important. Those visuals like you talked about. And if you're solving a problem in math, they should watch the pen move across the screen. They should see you stroke every number, not see it in chunks or not see the end result.
I've become a huge fan of
light
board videos. So almost all of my videos now are made at a light board. And what a light board is a teacher is standing in front of a piece of glass, a literal piece of glass, and the glass is lit up. And behind them, they would have a black screen. That's typically, some are white, but typically they're black. And then the light board is lit up. I mean, if you're watching this, I'm standing in my light board studio right now. I've got this piece of glass and then there's black cloth. I've got it bent back because the vacuum eats it up. But then I'm writing, and you can see over on the wall, I have a camera. I've taken the camera off, but that's a mount for my camera. And then I make these videos, and then they see your face and they see you writing. It looks weird because people always ask, how are you writing backwards? Because then what you use is there's a software program that will flip it. There's companies who make these commercially. One that makes a real reasonable price one is one called eGlass, and I think it's like $700, and you get the glass and software that automatically flips the image, and you just like push start and stop. There's some other tools. There's a number of companies that make these commercially. When I first discovered this, I made my own. And there's videos. In fact, I made a video on YouTube on how to make your own light board for $50 on an iPhone. So it's not, anyways, I just find that engaging because, again, they can see your face and they can see you writing on the wall, on the glass. It's for teachers, what I have found is they all know how to write at a chalkboard. And my school bought one for the school, commercial one. The students or the teachers will walk in, they push on, they push record, they do their thing, they push stop, the video goes to Google Drive, and boom, they have a video. They upload it to Edpuzzle is what they do. So
right. And the key of that is the simplicity. And the more that you do it, the more you find these different ways to engage and interact with the students. But when I first did it, I put a chair on a desk, propped my iPad up there, and wrote on the whiteboard as I taught. And it got the job done. And even as I improved my game, I would go back and look at those. And if some of them still got the job done, I just kept them because I didn't have the time to recreate all of those.
And I still make some videos like that too. So one thing I do, again, here's another sort of hack that I discovered from an Australian educator, is so when my students are struggling with a difficult problem, okay, so a problem set. I'm sorry, I teach chemistry and physics, so think of back to high school chemistry, and there's like these chemistry problems or physics problems you have to do. I've actually made like 1-minute videos on specific problems, and I call these helper videos. And so I create a Google Doc, which is a copy of their assigned problems. And then for example, my students are working on 9.5 tonight, let's say, and some of them are. I have made a helper video on probably, and let's say there's 10 questions that they have to respond to, which is about right. I have probably made 7 helper videos of 1 minute each. And so they open the Google Doc, they click on the blue link, it goes to a Google Drive video, they watch this 1-minute video, and it's not the solution to the problem, it's the setup. I call it the over the shoulder. So a student, if they were to come to me, and said, Mr. Bergman, I'm struggling on number 7. What would I tell them? And this is that short little series of hints. And I just use a screencasting program and a tablet and make the video. Sometimes I'll do it with a light board, especially with the ease of which they use. I've done that. Whatever, it doesn't matter what tool you use. But that's a really quick, easy way that students, if they are struggling on the thing, because I've got a bunch of kids in a class, and my goal is to go and talk and work with every single student. But I can't work with every single student at the same time. And the student knows that, hey, I can actually get more of Mr. Bergman, even in class, pull out my school-issued laptop, bang, put some headphones in. I can watch a 1-minute video. I'm over my hump where I'm struggling. Boom, I can do problem 7.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And the last piece that I want to highlight that you said is focusing, is it should be a very direct one topic lesson. And an example I like to provide is a big part of 5th grade math was fractions. I had a lesson on how to find common denominators. I had another lesson on adding fractions, and I had another lesson on subtracting fractions. That's a typical class that a teacher would try to cram everything in one class because all those skills go together, but they're very segmented. So it allowed me to leverage it in different ways. One, it allowed me to segment it for students, or as I pulled data and I looked at how students were performing, I could identify, well, these 7 students, they don't even know how to find common denominators yet. So I'm going to start them there. These 7 students, they already get that concept. They just don't realize that they have to do that to add. So now I'm just going to throw them right onto the adding one. They don't need to know how to find common denominators. So it allows you to leverage those much more precisely for students and personalize that a little bit more. And I just think it creates a better product. And you said this in the beginning that I really want to talk about. Flipping is the key to all of these different strategies and concepts that you're talking about. Small group instruction, center-based instruction, station rotation, mastery learning. All of these are rocket fuel is poured on these when you have flipped lessons.
There's a study done. I cited this study in my TED Talk. There was a study done by, I don't know who it's done, but it was a study of 15,000 U.S. chemistry professors. All right. So that's a large sampling of chemistry professors across the United States, university professors. And they surveyed and they asked, how many of you have flipped your classroom? And I was very impressed that it was 20 to 25, maybe 23. I don't know exact numbers, but so high percentage. Quarter of them. And this was pre-pandemic. But then the thing that was the most intriguing part of the study is they said this, that if a teacher flipped their class, a university professor, chemistry professor flipped his or her class, they were 16 times more likely to have an active classroom. All right, so that the classroom, they used active learning principles. And so the way I interpret that is that I honestly think active learning is the magic sauce. It's not flipped learning. But flipped learning is the easy button to get you to active learning. It's what makes it easy, because what it does is it gets the teacher away from the front of the room. And once you're away from the front of the room, most teachers, professors, whatever, they start asking the question, what am I going to now do with this extra time? If they, and most of them say, wow, I can have more debates. Wow, my kids can start speaking Spanish more. Wow, my students can do more experiments. Wow, they can just practice more problems that are difficult for them, and we could do more with them. Wow, we could do more Socratic seminars. It's whatever. It gives you that time. And if there's anything we've complained about as teachers for our whole careers, we don't have enough time to get to everything. Guess what? This gives you more time.
Mm-hmm. It really does. And a lot of what I present and consult on is small group instruction. That was really how I facilitated my elementary classroom almost on a daily basis. And you talked about this earlier. You spend that whole first week training your kids how to watch your video lessons. And I did something similar. I didn't spend a whole week on it, but at least the first couple times it was watching it, establishing the norms, establishing the expectations so that they understood how to do that. And I say to teachers, even if you're not going to use flipped lessons, think about and you've spoken this a little bit, so I'd love for you to add in. You talk a lot about readings. How are you going to allow your students to learn content independently? And if you truly want to enhance your classroom with active learning, with small group instruction, your students have to be able to learn new content without you. If the work without you is always practice and review, you will fall behind. They have to be able to learn new content. So even if it's reading articles, if it's annotating text, if it's different concepts, you have to train them how to learn in that modality to make that possible. But the end of the day, I completely agree with you. Ignore flipping, ignore screencasting, ignore video lessons all you want. It is the single easiest way to allow you to interact more with your students on a one-on-one small group basis. And I've had teachers say to me, why do I want to record myself? I value the time I have with students. And I said,
absolutely.
That's why you want to record yourself, because you value the time you have with students. I interact more with my students because they can lean on those as well as I can lean on those to create those small group moments. So can you speak more to how you're using the readings or other ways you're having your students?
Yeah, let me back up and just say one other thing. You were talking about how much time you would train the students on how to use this new medium, video. And just because students know how to watch a video doesn't mean they know how to watch an instructional video. And I was working with a 6th grade teacher here in Texas, a master flip teacher, and he would not send a video home for 3 weeks because he felt like he really hammered home how to use those videos. And then they were ready. So, if you've got younger students, I teach, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. Hopefully they're more mature than a 6th grader. Sometimes they aren't. But the point is that, so I would just encourage you to make sure you take time to teach them how. Anyways, what was the question? What was you going to ask?
So you've talked a little bit about reading. So what are other ways you're having your students obtain content knowledge other than the videos?
So I think of it as pre-work, right? So the pre-learning or so in the world of flipped, we've actually so this is new since, say at least our first book, we talk about 2 spaces. We talk about the individual space, and then we talk about the group space or the independent space, actually. So in the independent space, that's where they're going to get introduced to new content. And so the principle of when they are working alone, it is something that would be easy for them. Okay, it's not, so from a Bloom's taxonomic perspective, you want to be at the lower levels of Bloom's, knowledge and understanding. And that's different for a 3rd grader than for a 10th grader. So know your audience. So best principle is you want to make sure there's that independent space. And what is and you have to look at each individual lesson and say, is this the best independent space learning object? Is that a video or is that text? You have to just decide. You have to look and say, in this lesson, it's best if they read. If this lesson, it's best that they watch a video. You have to decide lesson by lesson what is the best. Ideally, honestly, I think you can also give students choice. All right. So if I have a video lesson on a topic, and I have a textual, this is the introduction, the lower level Bloom's independent space learning object, then they can choose the video or the text. And that's one thing that I like to do. I'm not quite all there yet, even with the content I've got now. I'd like to find some better text-based readings on my topics. But I do text works. The guy who does text the best is Eric Mazur. Eric is a physics professor at Harvard. He's a friend. He's an amazing guy. And what he does, he just assigns reading. And so he assigns actually a textbook. He has a physics textbook that Harvard physics students read, and they will read section 5 of chapter 5, or whatever it is, the topic of the day. And then in there, what he has them do is he actually developed a software tool. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a great tool called Perusall, Perusall. It's a free tool, and you can upload videos, or it's primarily a text reading tool. So think like Edpuzzle with words. So the students are reading it. It's tracking their reading. And then what they can do is he expects them to write questions so they can read, and line 17, they highlight line 17 and they ask a question. but it's a social reading platform such that you can see what I wrote, and then you can respond to my question. And so he's got, it's a Harvard physics class, large lecture hall physics. He might have 100 or 200 students. I don't know. It's not like my classes that are, in the 20s. So he's got, a lot of students, and then they are responding back and forth to each other in the independent space outside of class. And when they come to class, he looks at their questions, and that's how he decides what are they struggling with and what am I going to do. As a note, he built this tool, Perusol, with his buddy, who's an artificial intelligence professor at Harvard. He's now at Texas, I think, the artificial intelligence guy. But anyways, crazy smart people. So the AI is actually analyzing all the responses of the students, and actually it can produce what they call a confusion report. So it can summarize. So if you have 100 students who make 5 or 6 comments, to read all those would be a lot of work, right? Well, guess what? The AI reads it, and he just says, I see what they're confused about.
Right, because it's going to be slightly different comments, but the technology is kind of consuming all that in some
And so now he knows where to start his class. And so that's a good way to use text. And the same thing, by the way, what happens with a video. I can upload. I used that tool last year. I switched to a different tool. I keep changing around what tool I have. And then the students, I could upload a video to it, and they would pause the video at 5 minutes and 22 seconds, and they would make their comment, and I get the same AI analysis tool that he had as well. So I mean, whatever. Those are some ways to use text, but I guess as I've written multiple times in my books, I encourage you just to think lesson by lesson. The pre-learning activity, is it better to do it on text or video? You decide. Then the difficulty, of course, is what will you do with your class? Then what's the best activity for them to really learn this? Is it just small group tutorial? Is it them to take it to the next level? I mean, I'm thinking of my classes just these last few days. My students in my physics class, they've been learning about circuits, but the real learning happens, honestly, when they have a circuit, right, with wires and light bulbs. And so they build these circuits, and then I make them sit there and I say, why is it happening? So the last bulb, this conversation I had just hours ago, this bulb is dim and this one is bright. Why? And how does that relate to how circuits are best understood? Kind of also, and it's a big analogy with like a water pressure. And so it talked to me about water pressure. So they have to talk about a plumbing system with water. And that really helps them kind of get the real visual what's going on. But they have to sit and literally explain it and say, when you can explain it, that's then I'm ready to talk. You can build it because they can, put a wire here, put a wire here, put a light bulb here, put a resistor here, da 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 da. They can build it, but then they have to explain to me why what happened. That's their assessment. And then they get it, and then they go back to paper circuit, and light bulb moment. But they watched a cheesy video of me with, writing wire lines on a board, kind of boring video in many ways, but, they needed to have that introduction, so they kind of had a sense.
Mm-hmm. It's so powerful. It's something that, like I said to you, I think maybe before we recorded, I first attempted this in 2015, and I went all in. I didn't have my own kids at the time, and I just went all in. I recorded probably over 100 lessons that year, and was flipping. I was at that time, most of my students could watch online, but I was actually, and I think I remember reading this in your book, I was giving out DVDs to kids that didn't have internet access at home. So I was burning DVDs. I don't even know if I would know how to do that nowadays, but passing those out to kids as they went. And then when I reflected on it, it was very successful. But then when I was in year 2, it was like, man, I already have all this. And then the data piece came in. Well, that kid doesn't need to watch that lesson. He already knows how to do this. And that's where it all came back into the classroom. And I ended up sending very little home because I was able to plug and play with what they need and when they need. And I just can't reiterate enough. I'm very passionate about this. It is the game changer to any type of instructional strategy you want to do, because you're just multiplying yourself. At the very end of the day, at the very simple fashion, you are multiplying yourself in your ability to service your students and to support them and to do all those cool activities like you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I mean, if you
So
are
I want,
passionate about
please.
project-based learning, if you're passionate
Hmm.
about inquiry learning, if you're passionate about pick your whatever, you will be able to do it better. There's even research out there. I mean, I keep update on what's going on in the flipped learning research, and they'll say this particular model. There's a what's it called in physics? Oh, I should know this. It's escaping me. It's patterns physics. No, there's a particular modeling physics. There's this methodology of teaching physics called modeling. A lot of experimentation and inquiry in modeling physics. There's modeling chemistry. It's a kind of inquiry technique. And there was a research study that said modeling by itself or modeling plus modeling plus flipped wins because they got more time to do the modeling stuff. So I mean, and there's study after study about things like that. You know, does inquiry plus flipped or just inquiry? Inquiry plus flipped wins. I mean, you know, it's just because you've got more time. Another thing you haven't said or we haven't talked about that I think we really should make sure we talk about. My belief about what makes good teaching good. We've said active learning, but I think there's another component, and that is relationships. And it is the social emotional needs of our students. And if I've seen anything since COVID, is I've seen more social emotional needs than I've ever seen in my career. COVID did a number on our kids. I don't know. That's my experience. And I've talked to teachers. I have a privilege of talking to teachers all over the world all the time. I'm hearing the same thing everywhere in the corner of the globe. The beautiful thing about Flipped is that you have more time to guess, not just help them with their math facts or whatever you're teaching them, but to get to know them and to develop that you know, kids need adults in their lives that care. So let's not forget that piece of this, because frankly, flipped learning humanizes education in ways that are very intangible. And I really think when you mix the two, you know, active learning and relationships for the win. It's easy if you're just going to stand up and do the chalk talk to hide behind your lecture and not take the time to really get to know the kids. But if your job is to walk around and sit with kids, I mean, I sit and talk with kids all day long. That's what I do. I don't talk to whole groups of kids, except at the first 5 minutes to kind of make sure I know who's doing what, where. I call it triage, so I can get them know who's doing what, and then I'm walking around helping kids. But guess what? In that conversation, I get to not just help kids about science.
Yeah, you're totally right. And you know, you rattled off project-based learning, inquiry learning, active learning. The sweet spot of all of those is it increases your opportunity to form those relationships, like you said, because you get to know your students more, both academically, but then you have the easy access to those social conversations when you're floating around the room, when you're pulling small groups, when you're working with students one-on-one. So I want to be respectful of your time, and we always wrap up with an exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. But I want to ask one question before that, because I feel like we've talked in depth about this in a very valuable way. And I think we've painted the picture of what it can look like. And so the last piece of advice I'd like to hear from you is, where do teachers start now? And I'm excited for this answer because I know what my answer was 4 years ago before the pandemic, but now we've crossed the threshold of teachers understanding the technology. So what is your advice for teachers that most likely know how to make screencasts, they know how to make some videos, they know how to upload them and share them to students? What is their first step in attempting to use flipped lessons in their classroom?
If you're just starting out, the good news is you don't have to flip a class. You can flip a lesson, right? So when I first started doing this, I was all in like you can, and I flipped everything. But that doesn't mean you have to start. Maybe you've got kids, you've got a mortgage, you got a life, and you don't have time. Flip a lesson here, flip one unit, and then build this in. I'm working with a school now here in the Texas area, and I was going over plans. So the plan was that each person in this pilot would flip a class starting next school year. So we took a year to learn how to flip well, and now they're going to plan to flip a class. But some teachers, they said, next year I've got 10 units, like 4th grade teacher. I'm just going to do writing. And I'm probably going to only flip of my 8 units. I'm going to get 6 of them done, but then I'll have 6 done. And the next year I'll get the rest of them done, or maybe I'll do math. So they're trying to make it work with their life. And so I'd encourage you to make it work with your life. And secondly, I think, not to sound whatever the word is, telling you to sell you something. But Aaron Sams and I have just rewritten or have a new, totally updated new version of our first book, Flip Your Classroom. Comes out, we're recording this in April, comes out in May or June, like in the next few weeks. I would encourage you to pick up a copy of that. And if you're really interested in like going all in on mastery, my book, Mastery Learning Handbook, was number one on Amazon in curriculum instruction for a time when it first came out just in October. So this is also a very new book, which will walk you through the logistics of how to do mastery learning and do it well. My point in writing that book was a lot of people talk about doing mastery or competency-based learning, but how do you actually do it with 6 classes a day and 30 kids in a class? Well, I do it every day. I promise you can do it. And if you're in Houston, Texas, you're welcome to come to my class, by the way. Send me an email, jonbergman.com, find my email address or my contact information, and you are so welcome to come just talk to my kids. So there you go.
I love it. So I want to jump into our exit ticket, which, like I said, is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Care about them individually, get to know them. Kids need an advocate. They need somebody who cares. So recently, I have a student who's not been as engaged. And I've been trying to figure out how to reach him. And he can be kind of a bit of a wild kid sometimes, but also quiet. He's kind of an interesting young man. And his name's abbreviation is CS. First initial C, first name is C, last name is S. And then it just came to me. And I teach chemistry. CS is the element cesium. Cesium is the most reactive element on the periodic table. And so I started calling him cesium. Dadgummit, if that kid doesn't, he goes by cesium now. His baseball coach calls him cesium. And and then he had to invite a teacher. It was like, invite your teacher to the baseball game night. And who does he invite? Me, the guy who came up with his new name. And he loves that his name is cesium. I just call him cesium. So, that little thing, he just needed to be noticed. And
I was going to say, he loves it because you noticed
right.
him.
That's all what it came down to. That I had a cheesy way to do it. It made the difference. He'll remember that his name was cesium for the rest of his life. Who knows? I'm actually trying to think how I could do this with other kids. So, yeah.
Periodic table is pretty big. I think the potential is that you might not be able to match the initials, but even if you just go with its qualities, or it would even be a fun activity is just have them.
I've had that exact same thought. Like beginning of the year, you got to pick an element.
Have them pick the element.
You're bored.
That best showcases their qualities. Yeah. So, second question: what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? Could be from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
Best advice I've ever received. So I taught with a gal one of my first few years of teaching, and she was the Colorado Teacher of the Year. And I worshipped her. She taught the kids who were the kids who struggled the most at school, right? She taught BD kids and kids, she's a special education teacher. And actually, I don't know if it's the best advice, but when she turned to me, and I was like really trying to be the best teacher I could possibly be, right? Young, motivated teacher. And she says, John, I don't think I can actually reach every kid. I thought, you're the best teacher in Colorado. If you can't reach every kid, it took the pressure off me that I didn't have to be everything to every kid at every time. In fact, we just had a conversation at my current school a couple of days ago, and we were talking. So our students do a student evaluation of teachers. Like everyone takes the same evaluation of, some for me and some for my colleagues. And we were just having this conversation. And, some of the kids, in my class, some of the kids said they felt like they didn't connect with me. That's like one of the questions. Our school really values relationships, et cetera. And it was very few, but it's like, really, what have I done? And then our conversation just went to me and my colleagues. It's just like, the reality is I'm not going to reach every kid. I reached cesium, but maybe I didn't reach barium. I don't know. I didn't reach that other kid. And I have to be okay with that. My hope is that they're really connecting with another adult. Maybe they're connecting with their their history teacher or their physical education teacher or whatever. And that's fine. Every kid needs an adult advocate for them. So
It's hard. It's like a punch to the heart when you get something like that, because you truly do care
and it was
so much.
literally
And you
one
want to be
child
that,
of
but
all the kids. And so, and it could be the
Right.
kid. I mean, I know high school kids enough to know that, like, hey, let's just have fun and just pick buttons to push. It could be that. So
Mhm.
I'm not totally like worried because the
Right.
results were very good.
Right.
But there was like, really? So it could just be goofy kids.
hmm But you do have to accept it. You have to accept, I always try to be very, uh, I try to always be there as much as possible for my students and let them know that they could always come to me when they were having concerns or problems. But I would always say, if you have that concern, if you feel like you need someone and I'm not the person, tell me and I'll send you to the person. And as much as I always wanted to be the person for them to come to, I also took pride in knowing that they could at least come to me to say, Mr. Ehrman, I really need to talk to an adult, but can I go talk to so-and-so? And I wanted that to be that person, but that was enough because they still trusted me on a layer to say that they needed someone else.
And I think there are
so
some people that are, certainly some teachers in my school and all the schools I've taught, that are just gifted in that sort of empathetic connections with kids. And I'm not really that way. I love kids and I think we really have an opportunity to really connect, but I'm not, I mean, if they're really going through a crazy difficult time, I doubt I'm the first person they're going to think of. They love the innovative way I teach. They love, I mean, there's a lot of things I think they love about how I am, but I'm just not built to be that sort of deep relational teacher they're going to go to. We've got teachers like that.
Right.
And not just teachers.
Right.
Some of them
Absolutely.
are counselors, even like secretaries.
Right.
And, they need an adult who's on their side. It doesn't have to be
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we know the school year goes in waves. There are days or weeks that we struggle to survive, whether it be report card time, conference time. What is something that every educator needs to hear to power up in that moment of struggle?
I was at a conference recently, the ASCD conference, and I was really impacted by the keynote speaker whose name is escaping me right now. But what he said is he encourages you to think finitely, because he actually talks about this. He was a speaker about teacher well-being and teacher wellness. And that really has impacted me, is that if it's your best moment, it's going to come to an end. But if it's your worst moment, it will end. There's a finite time. And also, on the flip side of that, is the only moment that you have with your students is that moment that you're in. And so when you are in that class, when I'll be in class tomorrow morning with my students, there will never be a time like that ever again, where we're going to be having the same group of kids doing the same things at that time, and to value that time and to live in the moment. And that's really, it's gotten me thinking a lot in the last, few weeks since I came back from that conference. I took copious notes. This guy was just brilliant. He's written a book. Again, the name is escaping me, but yeah, finite thinking.
Yeah, I think that's great. So last question. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. I'm really excited for this one. What separates teachers who are constantly the ones seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
You just got to be willing to evaluate and say, this doesn't work, and this does. And every time something fails, decide if it just needs to be changed or tweaked. Like with flipped learning, there was a study done. Again, I've been keeping up on the studies. A recent study that said students at first don't like flipped learning. This university, but after 6 weeks, they start to love it more because they have to get used to the new method. So I don't want you to, if you're trying something new, sometimes you give up too soon. So I don't want you to say, just because it doesn't work the first time, you throw it out. You need to keep practicing. But at some point, if you've done it enough, you need to say, how can I tweak this and make it better? So, I mean, even as I was writing this book, right, I said, instead of having 2 levels of tests, I had 3 levels. So if you read this book, I talk about having 3 levels of tests. Well, in this intervening time since I wrote the book and the book got published, I switched to 2 levels. And I found that works way better, because it's like, it was just logistically getting to be too difficult to manage. And so, even though I've published this, I've decided to change because I don't know. So maybe the answer is reflection. I don't know. In a nutshell, reflect on what you're doing and then do something about it.
Absolutely. So last thing is just tell us how our audience can connect with you, follow along with you, and learn more from you.
So just go to jonbergman.com. Now, Jon spelled weird, Jon Bergman, Bergma, and then 2Ns.com, jonbergman.com. At Jon Bergman on Twitter. Those are a couple of places you can find me. And then if you could, I've got a podcast. You can listen to my podcast. I've got books, newsletters, those kinds of things. So I encourage you to connect. And come see me. If you are in Houston, come see me teach and just meet my kids.
I hope I find myself in Houston in the near future, so I can take you up on that one.
It's becoming more common. People are just stopping by. I had a few teachers, I guess about a month ago, and they just hung out for half a day and they got to talk to my kids and sort of see it in action. So, yeah.
That's great. There's nothing better than teachers seeing teachers. As a coach, we've been spending more and more time covering classes for teachers, not as sub coverage, but for instructional goals. So I can cover their class so that they can go see a colleague utilizing instructional strategy that they're hoping to adopt, because it's so much more powerful for them to see it, even more powerful than me leading a model lesson for them just seeing someone in the same space where they feel, it's just different. Getting to see teachers teach is the best thing.
There's a study on that. There's a Harvard study that basically asks what causes teachers to change their practice. Is it the superintendent? No. Is it the principal? No. Is it the director of PD? No. Is it the instructional coach? No. The biggest change is if another teacher is doing it, especially if it's the guy across the hallway. Anyways, there's if you ever, I could find that study if you care, but it's fascinating. It's like, makes sense.
It really does. That's really fascinating. So Jon, I really, really appreciate it. This has been a pleasure for me. I've been following you for a long time, and I just have a lot of respect for what you do. I love how you've changed, how you've adopted what you created so long ago. You're back in the classroom to learn new ways and learn new strategies. I just think it's fantastic. So thank you so much for our time. And I also know now if I ever need a study on something, I'm going to shoot you an email and ask, does this study exist? And you can let me know if I should search for it or not.
Well, there's this thing called Google Scholar, and you can set up alerts, and that's how I know about these things, because I just read the alerts. That's
interesting.
I read the abstracts, or if the topic suits me, then I will dig down deeper. And if it doesn't, I just ignore it. So it doesn't
awesome.
take a huge amount of time to set up a Google Scholar alert. And it's like, oh, there's a new study out on flipped learning or on whatever.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jon. Thank you to our audience for joining in and listening. And I encourage you to visit his website. Everything that Jon talked about, some of the some of the studies, I will link up to our show notes page, which can be found if you just scroll down wherever you're watching or listening, or go to our website at powereduup.com, and I'll link up to your site as well, Jon. So you left me feeling absolutely powered up, and we're going to go ahead and power this episode down now. Have a good night, everyone, and be well. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.